So what have we here? We have sensory evaluation, which is a collection of scientific methods used to measure, analyse and interpret responses to food products through sight, smell, touch, taste and hearing. Moving on. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at. I mentioned this in passing. This is an interesting product. It's made from miraculin, a glycoprotein extracted fluid of Senesparlum dulciferum, which modifies taste such that bitterness is suppressed about an hour after use. We usually do this with students, but unfortunately in the current circumstances we can't. So I'm just mentioning it in passing and back to the main topic. Another phrase sometimes used, pretty much the same, is organoleptic properties. Another deaf phrase there, which you may not have come across before, is a sensory modality. This is how we perceive a sense or collection of senses. So flavour is a modality comprising many characteristics, not just taste. Taste and flavour, as you know, are not synonyms. Sensory evaluation is a key component of product development and manufacturing. It's relatively cheap, though usually needs trained staff and often particular specialist areas to work and manage the process. It's also of interest in developing our understanding of how our senses work, so there's a lot of science interest in this as well. Most sensory methods are essentially qualitative, whether people's views on things basically, and there's a lot of interest in using quantitative methods to validate these quantitative conclusions. For example, using texture analysis to validate sensory data from the studies of crisps would be one example. These are the questions we would ask about any analytical process, whether done in the lab or in many contexts, in many other contexts, but we certainly do for sensory analysis here. For valid sensory analysis, food needs to be accurately specified, as we've discussed already in this module, and prepared and served in a consistent way, which more a little bit later on. Much of the guidance we have, for example, in British standards is aimed at achieving this consistency. These are the main classifications of sensory methods. We'll look at these in a little bit more detail, but I'm not going to go into great detail because it's the sort of stuff that you would look up when you needed to know, as we've discussed in the development of the open book resource. We can specify further, as shown here. You can pause the slide and have a look at this if you're interested. And this is why we choose a particular method class. It's potentially important in terms of the exam. If you're answering a question about a sensory plan for a particular product, this is the first step. Decide what you are trying to ask at a high level. So if it's preference, it would be a rating one. If you're describing food, it would be a descriptive one, for example. As I mentioned, I'm not going into details of many of the tests available. For more information, see the relevant British standards and this excellent resource, which is a good resource for information, and also if you want to reference a particular method, this is a good place to reference it from. So sensitivity tests, we did this in the lab, at least some of us did. They provide the basis for trained panel selection. So see the method done in the lab and the relevant British standard for more information. Basically your panel members need to be able to distinguish different tastes at different concentrations, at quite low concentrations. Here's one specific example. The ability to taste bitterness is unsurprisingly genetically linked, but it's quite significant in a number of ways. Adults who can taste this substance, usually abbreviated as PROP, are usually more sensitive to bitter taste and fattiness, and often show less acceptance of foods that are high in these taste characteristics. They're sometimes described as super tasters. See this link, and this quite good video for more information on this interesting topic. This is often why we do a difference test when we're changing a product formulation for the reasons, some of the reasons are suggested there. So we change the formulation. We want to know the product consumer can tell the difference. A couple of important ones are obviously reduce salt and removing trans fats. Salt's been progressively reduced over the years, so people haven't really perceived the changes. It does seem to have stalled, unfortunately, in the past few years. Okay. difference tests. Although trained panelists may be used, in many cases an untrained consumer panel will be used, as they are more representative of potential customers. Again, it depends on the application. The SPP defines a rating or effective test as any method to assess acceptability, liking, preference or emotions for a stimulus or stimuli, again associated with food from our point of view. Here the idea is to find out which products potential customers prefer. Again, many approaches are possible, and tools may need to be targeted for different groups, so you might have to have a different questionnaire for adults compared to children, for example. Sometimes also called hedonic tests. Hedonic refers to sensations in general. The 9-point hedonic scale, again linked here through to the SSP information, is very widely used. It was originally developed by US Armed Forces for the purposes of measuring the food preferences of soldiers. It's been widely adopted by the food industry around the world and for many, many other types of survey. The scale is designed to give equal spacing between the answers as well as supporting its validity. This makes conversion with the numeric scale easy, so facilitating qualitative analysis. Again, there's a good link there if you want to read more about this. Descriptive tests, we've talked about this before in terms of sensory vocabularies. It's basic information we need to describe a food. Forms the basis of sensory questionnaires and other tools we use. And there's a sensory questionnaire which is often used in the UK food industry, developed by the British Nutrition Foundation. I'm not going to read through these. These are some of the wider reasons for developing sensory vocabularies. You can pause the video yourself and have a read of them yourself. Okay, there are many ways in which we can describe food, and one of the main issues is analysing the many different descriptions people might use to obtain the useful and consistent words when we are developing a particular vocabulary. As we know from texture, words like stickiness have specific definitions. But looseness, maybe that doesn't have, I don't think has a particular definition. Size and shape, obviously we can define quantitatively. Also colour, but many others may be a little bit hard to define. Okay, this is of course covered in detail in the relevant British standard and the open book resource for the exam. Review this video here for information about test rooms. It's well worth having a look at. I'm not going to cover what it says, you can review it yourself. Again, there's lots of information available from the British Standard, as you might expect, and refer to the detailed material in the British Standard and in the open book resource for more details. The BS and the OBR include plans for several configurations of sensory rooms depending on issues such as the size of the organisation. This will be important for any question asking about the design of a sensory facility. Different scale organisations will have different scale sensory facilities. So take this into consideration when you are answering questions in the exam. Presenting the samples is really important. Samples need to be presented in a consistent way to ensure that all assessors get the same experience. So there's some characteristics there. We tend to present food in small amounts, so it's representative of food but not representative of a meal. That's an important consideration. Normal eating temperature can be quite difficult. Smaller packages of food will cool down quicker if they're being cooked. We try to use neutral white containers as well. Sometimes we can use red lighting to wash out colour differences. Colour differences can make a big impact on people's perception. Samples are coded randomly to prevent, for example, runs of numbers that might unconsciously or consciously influence assessors. Tables are provided with the relative British standards, or random numbers can be easily generated using tools like Excel's rand between function. There's some examples there. So what's wrong with these pictures? Pause the video and have a think about it. Okay, I've assumed you paused. We're now going to come back. The 3 cups at the top are different sizes, in fact, so that wouldn't be a good plan. The 3 down here are probably the best example of the 3 groups, and the 3 over here are fine in terms of the size of the containers, but they're actually, now I'm looking at the other one now, there's a problem with the second one as well. I'll come back there in a second. So these the problem with all of them, these are okay in terms of the description of the containers, but they contain different amounts of fluid. This one, it has different labelling on one of them. I didn't notice this when I was writing the notes for the slide, so I'll probably have to go back and correct that. So there's a problem in the case of all of these three examples. Between tasting samples, palate cleansers are normally offered. They must be bland. Still mineral water and unsalted crackers are often used. Unsalted crackers can be quite hard to find. Okay, panel members. There's a clear distinction between the different categories of assessors. They all have important roles to play. Experts can make rapid, accurate judgments, but may not reflect the opinions of customers, of consumers. So again, this is reviewed in detail in the relevant British standard. Some basics for all panel members. They need to be able to taste to an appropriate level. They need to be available when we want to do the test. They need to be motivated to do it. And they need to be healthy in general terms. In particular, obviously, they don't need to have any food poisoning related issues within recent time. We also need to screen for allergens and ensure that specific groups are considered in the panel selection. There's no group good having a food product which contains meat if you then have a group of vegans or vegetarians involved. That's okay. There we are. Thanks for listening.